ayes have it. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Under this government, Australians are struggling with rising electricity and gas bills. So why is the Prime Minister wasting $122 million of taxpayers' money on a pointless and unnecessary postal plebiscite when he could use that money to help fund this year's energy supplement for 334,000 pensioners?
The Leader of the House will cease interjecting. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mutt. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And look, I thank the honourable member for his question. The government is delivering on its promise to give all Australians a say, and at the same time, we are working to bring electricity prices down. What has the Labor Party done? They do not have a policy. They do not have a policy to create a job, to create a dollar of investment. It is the most left-wing, anti-business Labor Party we have seen in generations. What is their plan for energy prices? Huge renewables targets, closing down baseload power, no plans for storage, no plans for anything. And if you want to know what it would look like across Australia, South Australia is right there. They know. The South Australians in this chamber know very well, Mr Speaker, what the consequence of Labor's reckless ideological approach to energy is. Now, just today, Mr Speaker, we have met with the energy retailers and securing real action from them to ensure that Australian families will not be paying any more for their electricity than they need to, securing a better deal for millions of Australian families. That's going to have an impact right now, in the here and now. The Labor Party likes to talk about their vision for renewable energy. Well, in the here and now, we're going to build the largest renewable energy project in the Southern Hemisphere. That's the difference between this side of the House and that side of the House: ideology and politics, engineering and economics. The reality is we're getting on with the job. We're getting on with the job of ensuring Australians have affordable and reliable power. The Labor Party has presided over a rise in electricity prices driven by their recklessness, whether it's in the gas market, whether it's in the electricity market. It is their failure, Labor's failure to plan, Labor's addiction to ideology, that has created the pressures on Australian families that we are seeking to relieve, not next year, not in 10 years, but right now. We're looking after Australian families today.
Just before, if members could cease interjecting for a second, before I call the member for Grey, I'd like to welcome a couple of special guests to question time today. Joining us in the gallery is the Honourable Lauren Moss, MLA, the Northern Territory Minister for Environment, Natural Resources, Tourism and Culture, and also joining us is the Honourable Todd McVeigh, the New Zealand Minister for Trade. On behalf of the House, we extend a very warm welcome to you both. The member for Grey.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister advise the House on the action the government is taking to reduce retail electricity price for millions of Australians? You may well laugh. I come from South Australia.
The member for Grey
to reduce
will proceed
electricity
with his
prices
question.
for households, including in my electorate
Member for
of Grey.
Grey will resume his seat. Members on my left will cease interjecting. I didn't hear the second half of the member for Grey's question. The member for Rankin is warned. The Prime Minister will resume his seat. I did not hear the second half of the question. The member for Grey will repeat his question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister advise the House on the action the government is taking to reduce retail electricity prices for millions of Australian households, including in my electorate of Grey?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It says a lot, Mr Speaker, about the opposition that when a South Australian member asks about energy, they seek to drown him out with shouting? Because they're shame. The South Australian energy situation is the worst in the nation, and it has been created by Labor Party ideology and politics. Now, Mr Speaker, we met today, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Treasurer and the Minister for Energy and I met with the major electricity retailers today to ensure that we got a better deal for Australian families. And, Mr Speaker, what we know—
Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Hotham's warned. The member for Perth will leave under 94A. We're not going to do this every day. Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What we know is that too many Australian households and businesses are paying more for their electricity than they need to because they are on plans which have expired, discounted plans which have expired, and they have gone back onto standing offers, and they're paying far too much for their electricity. And we're not talking about small amounts. The Australian Energy Market Corporation has identified that the difference in the plans between what people should be paying and what they are can run up into the hundreds of dollars a year, in some cases up to $1,500 a year. And as the Treasurer said in the press conference after the meeting, he said the best friends of the retailers are complexity and inertia, because consumers simply do not know what their rights are, what their opportunities are. So we have secured real reforms to this electricity sector which will benefit families right now. We're ensuring that the electricity retailers will make their customers aware of the best deals that are available for them. And in particular, if they are on a discounted plan, as many people are, which is coming to an end, they will have an obligation to advise that customer that their plan is coming to an end, what the consequence will be if it comes to an end without them going on to a new plan, if they go onto the standing offer, and they will show what that would mean for them in terms of additional expenditure based on their last year's consumption. Now, this is going to involve a change to the regulations under the National Electricity Law. Because of their support for it, it can be done on an expedited basis and can be done in 6 weeks. Now, our commitment is to ensure that our consumers, our families, households, businesses are well informed, and that the retailers give them the information that enables them to ensure they have the best deal. This is action right now. It will mean that families will be paying no more than they need to right now, remedying the mistakes made over so many years by Labor.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that the $122 million that he's wasting on his voluntary, non-binding postal plebiscite could instead fund more than 1,800 residential aged care
Member for
places?
Sydney resume her seat. The Leader of the House is warned. The Minister for Health will cease interjecting. The member for Sydney will start her question again.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that the $122 million that he's wasting on his voluntary, non-binding postal plebiscite could instead fund more than 1,800 residential aged care places, provide over 16,000 annual childcare rebates, or support over 2.7 million bulk billed GP visits? Why is the government wasting $122 million on a postal plebiscite that the Prime Minister's told his party they can ignore?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the government is giving every Australian a say on the issue of marriage because we promised to do so at the election, and we keep our promises.
The member for SWAN has the call.
Fine answer.
Member for SWAN has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on action the government is taking to put downward pressure on the cost of living for all Australians? Treasurer, how is the government taking practical action to ease the burden on family and business budgets?
Great question. The Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for SWAN, who both as a successful small business person, as a former electrician, understands well the impact on both small business budgets and indeed family budgets when it comes to rising prices, whether they be on electricity, Mr Speaker, or they be in other areas. Now, the government understands that the flat incomes that Australians have been dealing with now over some years puts real pressure on those family budgets. That's why in this year's budget we announced that we were guaranteeing the essential services that Australians rely on, whether they be in Medicare, Mr Speaker, or in the National Disability Insurance Scheme, or record funding for education, Mr Speaker, and that we're also acting to put downward pressure on rising electricity prices and other essentials of life, Mr Speaker. And I announced in the budget, again, the Prime Minister's 5-point plan to put downward pressure on electricity prices, and that is to keep our gas at home to ensure that it delivers on domestic needs, that we are increasing the supply of energy through generation, storage and transmission, Mr Speaker, that we are investing, thirdly, in low emissions technologies, and we're ensuring, as the Energy Minister has, that the regulatory system doesn't put pressure on prices going up, but puts pressure on pushing prices down, such as abolishing the limited merits review initiative that he is taking forward, Mr Speaker. But it was also about ensuring that customers do not get taken for a ride by large energy companies when it comes to their power bills. And today we are giving the power back to families over their power bills, Mr Speaker. We're giving the consumer power back because a real competitive market is the competitive market where customers have real power. And the tools and the information and the obligations that are being put on those energy companies as a result of the meeting we had today and the work that this government will continue to proceed will ensure that millions of Australians will get a better deal on their energy bills, and they have the tools to do that. And an important part of that is also empowering them with their own data to get a better deal. So whether it's getting a better deal out of your energy company, getting a better deal out of your telco, getting a better deal out of your bank, customers need to be empowered to get the right prices and to get the right deals out of their market. Now, the Labor Party only has a policy to drive up electricity prices. Whether it's the foolishness of their 50% RET target will just put more cost on business. It will shut business down, as the South Australian government has been shutting businesses down, Mr Speaker, in the same way that the Leader of the Opposition wants to tax Australians out of business. He wants to put prices on families that will drive them to the wall, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Today, the member for Warringah warned Australians to vote no in the plebiscite for reasons unrelated to marriage equality, claiming, if you're worried about religious freedom and free speech, vote no. If you don't like political correctness, vote no. Last night, when asked about marriage equality, Bronwyn Bishop referred to polygamy, bestiality and the killing of children. How can the Prime Minister guarantee there will be respectful discussion sticking to the issues when his own Liberal colleagues behave like this?
The members on both sides will cease interjecting. OK, the member for Eden-Monaro can leave under 94A. The member for Barker and the member for Hume are warned. The member for Jellybrand is warned. Members on both sides should pick up the cue here. The Leader of the House on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister was asked about the comments of individual members and even members that are no longer in the House.
Yep.
They're hardly within his areas of responsibility, and as a consequence—
Leader of the House resume his seat. The member for Lindsay is warned. I am not going to listen to points of order and be interjected over by members on anywhere in the chamber, on either side. I'm making it very clear. And if members are warned and ejected, as I've said, it's their choice. I'm not going to keep repeating this through question time. It's ridiculous. The Leader of the House will repeat his point of order.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister was asked a question about statements of members on the backbench in the House and even statements about former members of the Parliament. Neither of these are within his area of responsibility as the Prime Minister, and therefore he should not be required to answer that question.
The Manager of Opposition Business will resume his seat. I listened to the question very carefully. The preamble to the question referred to a member of this House and a former member of this House. The question itself was more general, and I'm going to rule it in order. The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I have great confidence in the good sense of the Australian people. Mr Speaker, are we seriously at the point? Are we seriously at the point where the Labor Party has so little confidence in Australians that they would shut down a right to vote because people have said things they find outrageous or unacceptable, or that are regarded as unacceptable by the vast majority of Australians? Mr Speaker, in any debate, there will be statements made which are offensive, which many will regard as extreme, which many regard as wrong. I can tell you, in this debate, I will be encouraging Australians to vote yes. I will be encouraging Australians to vote yes. Others will encourage them to vote no. And I urge every participant in the debate to act with responsibility and with respect for those on the other side. But how they act is a matter for them, and it's a matter for them, and they will be judged by Australians, as will their arguments. Now, Mr Speaker, if we are seriously at the point where the Labor Party is saying you cannot have a vote on this issue in particular, because people will say outrageous things, then how could we have a referendum on any of the issues that have been discussed? How could you have a parliamentary election? How could you have a parliament? You can't have a parliamentary election, they'll be saying next, because who knows? Some candidate will say something outrageous, or someone will say something outrageous and unfair and cruel and wrong about a candidate. Mr Speaker, Australians can see through all of that. The Labor Party is disrespecting and underestimating the wisdom of the Australian people. We put our faith in them. We will give every Australian a say on this issue, as we promised them in the election. The Labor Party could have voted today to enable there to be a compulsory attendance ballot. They've refused to do that because they don't trust the Australian people. We will give everyone a vote.
The member for Sydney is warned. The member for Denison has the call.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the National Disability Insurance Scheme is obviously an important reform, and in principle I support budget measures to better fund it. However, my constituents tell me the scheme has many problems. For instance, they talk about an impenetrable and impersonal bureaucracy, as well as hopeless delays with internal reviews which lead to unnecessary distress and frustration for families. Prime Minister, if ever there was a government program that just had to be user-friendly, then this is it. So what will you do to better respond to community concerns? What will you do to ensure the NDIS works effectively for all people with disabilities and for their families?
The Prime Minister has the Minister for Social Services.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for Denison for his question. There's, I think, a general and specific answer to your question. The general answer is with respect to what has become known inside the NDIA as the Pathways Review. So a very thorough, own motion initiated review started by the new NDIA board into the experience of all participants has been conducted and concluded. And that involved consultations in the hundreds with stakeholders and with individual participants. The more specific answer is that if there are ever, and this applies to any member here, and many members see me from time to time, any individual case where you think that there has been bureaucratic excess or a problem or a delay, you are very welcome to come to my office, explain it and put it to me, and I extend this invitation meaningfully to you, because that will allow us not only to assist the individual but also feed that experience in a confidential way back into what is an ongoing effort to improve performance and experiences. But if I might just provide you member with a little bit of context. Reported at the end of the last quarter, we have moved 78,000 participants into the NDIS, and that represents about an 82% of the original bilateral estimates, which were very ambitious, as has been noted in many quarters. Now, there were original problems experienced with the payment portal, and in the first several weeks after we went to full transition, there were payment success rates hovering around about 70%. They have now moved up to a much better 93%. The number of participants that we've actually moved in Tasmania represents 97% of the bilateral estimate. So we are actually doing better than the national average in Tasmania. And the number of participants who have moved in, who have responded to us, describing their experience, their pathway as participants as either good or very good, as is noted in the last quarterly report, is 90%. Now, that's a good figure, but I'm not pretending that there are people there who haven't experienced that highly consistent level of performance through the pathway that we would want. So what I would just extend to you again is the genuine invitation to come and speak with me about individual cases that you might have encountered that can help us continually improve. But I would also reaffirm the fact that the NDIA board, the NDIA executive, and there is a new CEO now of the NDIA, are absolutely committed to understanding difficulties that are arising. And where there is 90% of people in Tasmania saying that their experience is good or very good, we acknowledge that there's 10% room for significant improvement. So perhaps if we could have a talk about that, but in an overarching way, we are very live to issues and problems and working very, very hard to improve the experience for all participants.
The member for Dawson.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Agriculture, Water, Resources and Northern Australia. Will the Deputy PM outline how the government is securing the future of agricultural production in Australia, including in my electorate of Dawson? Is he aware of any threats to the ongoing viability of the agricultural sector and the thousands of hard-working Australians it employs?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question and acknowledge the hard work that he has done, especially with the sugar industry, especially in support of the sugar code. He's making sure that people get a fair return back through the farm gate. And of course, one of the greatest concerns that the member for Dawson has and has conveyed to me is what's happened to the price of electricity in Queensland. The price of electricity in Queensland for a tonne of sugar cane back in 2012 for a tonne of sugar cane was $4, and today it's $15. The electricity cost for sugar itself, for a tonne of sugar, back in 2012 it was $35. Today it's $135. And what this shows, of course, is the Labor Party policy, the insane process in Queensland, where a state that has 6.4% renewable power now has a policy to go to 50% renewable power. Now, if you want to know about the Labor Party policy, it's quite clear. If you want to see what it looks like, the Labor Party policy looks like South Australia. It looks like South Australia. And in South Australia, we have seen the complete chaos that happened when people were caught in lifts, when they had to stop operations midway through, when the traffic lights went off, when the tuna fishermen lost their catch. And this is all a sign of the chaos of Labor Party policy and power. Most importantly, what we see in South Australia is the dearest power in Australia. That is what they have managed to deliver. That is Labor Party policy. And we note that the power prices are predominantly driven by the policies of state governments, and state governments are supposed to be driving what is happening in the power market. But now we have the Labor Party at a federal level also endorsing that policy. So we have the absurd position where a nation which is the largest exporter of seaborne coal, which will soon be the largest exporter of gas, which is the largest venue for uranium resource in the world, which has huge solar and wind power, is now under these Labor Party states having the highest power in the OECD. This is what Labor Party policy looks like. And the Australian people that live in the weatherboard eyes are fearful of an Australian Labor Party and what they are doing to their cost of living and their standard of living and their jobs. Because with the Labor Party's aversion, not only in the Galilee Basin, they don't believe in coal miners either. With their aversion to even say anything to do with coal-fired power, they won't say it. The member for Maribyrnong won't go to the dispatch box and amend it. There's a huge division in the Labor Party because they don't believe in labourers anymore. That is the biggest thing about the Labor Party. The Labor Party no longer believes in labourers anymore. And the member for Hunter and the member for Shortland are impotent on their side of the political fence to stand up for workers, to stand up for people and to drive an agenda which will bring back the standard of living and protect those most vulnerable. This side stands up for those who are vulnerable. We are going to help those and get down the power price.
The member for Jagga.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. According to analysis by National Seniors, increasing power prices combined with this government's plan to cut the energy supplement to new pensioners will mean that pensioners in New South Wales will be around $600 a year worse off. Why is the Prime Minister cutting the energy supplement, which will make it harder for pensioners to stay warm this winter?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, some of the people who are most vulnerable and most in need of the protections that we have secured for them today with the energy retailers are indeed pensioners. As you know, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence and St Vincent's and Grattan have observed that far too many people, older people in particular, pensioners, people on lower incomes, are paying standard offers for electricity because they are not aware of and have not taken advantage of lower discounted plans. And this is the point that we're addressing with the energy retailers today. So the critically important thing is to ensure that those customers are protected. Now, one of the other elements, and that will be done by ensuring it will become part of the law, the National Electricity Law, the regulations under that they will have to be provided if they are on an outdated or expired plan or on a plan that's about to expire. They've got to be made fully aware of what the consequences of that are and the opportunities to get a better deal and therefore pay less for their electricity. So that's going to particularly benefit the people that you're referring to. As far as the general protections in the electricity market, can I say to the honourable member that the most important thing is to ensure that Australians right now are not paying any more for electricity than they need to pay. Now we have many reforms underway, bringing down the price of gas. That's already been some progress there. We're stopping the network owners from gaming the system and appealing against the regulators' reviews and getting higher prices for their poles and wires. But what we are—
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. So's the member for Hunter, and now the member for Isaacs is too. The manager of opposition business might explain to the member for Isaacs the roles that both he and the Leader of the House have. The member for Jagga on a point of order.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, the question is, why is the Prime Minister cutting the energy supplement?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I can simply say that the opposition banked that saving in their own election campaign, and so they took it on. They banked it. The important point is that what we are doing today, have done today, is secure important reforms that will benefit all Australian families, but it will in particular benefit the families, pensioners, people on lower incomes, older Australians who number far too prominently among those who are paying standard offers because they are not aware of the ability to get a better deal. We want no Australian family to be paying any more than they need to for their electricity, and we've taken the important steps today to do that. Now, that is not something the Labor Party has ever advocated or done.
Concluded.
No action from the Labor Party.
Just before I call the member for Banks, I'd also like to inform the House we've just had join us in the Speaker's Gallery this afternoon a visiting delegation from the Republic of Korea. On behalf of all members, I extend a very warm welcome to you. The member for Banks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Energy. Will the Minister update the House on what the government is doing to put downward pressure on energy bills? What obstacles stand in the way of delivering reliable and affordable energy to hard-working Australian businesses and families?
The Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Banks for his question and acknowledge his deep concern about the impact that rising electricity prices are having on people in his electorate. And he understands that there's no single silver bullet to lowering electricity prices, and that's why the Turnbull government is taking action on a number of fronts, ensuring that there is more gas for domestic users, reining in the power of the networks to prevent them from gaming the system, investing in the newest technology and innovation like Snowy Hydro 2.0, and ensuring that the cop on the beat, the ACCC, is keeping a firm hand on the margins in the retail sector. And today's meeting was another step forward because the Prime Minister was able to secure significant and substantive reforms. We will now ensure that there is better information provided to households and consumers, because from now on, the electricity companies will be required to tell customers when they have come off a discount and the impact that it will have when they go onto a higher price system. We're now ensuring that you can compare the information, because we know the biggest discount doesn't necessarily mean the best deal. And we also now know that the lowest income households, those on hardship programs, will not lose their discount or their benefits as a result of a non-payment. Now, I'm asked, are there any obstacles to this approach? Well, we know that those opposite, when it came to their time in government, they were asleep at the wheel. Asleep at the wheel. Because the Labor Party gave us that dreaded carbon tax. The Labor Party gave us the cash for clunkers. The Labor Party gave us the Citizens' Assembly. And what was most punishing for households, for families, for pensioners, for businesses, was that the Labor Party gave us a more than 100% increase in power prices on their watch. And now they want to take the big experiment in South Australia national. And the member for Port Adelaide should know better. He should know better because the cost to his own state has been enormous in terms of jobs, in terms of confidence, in terms of investment, in terms of that state standing throughout the rest of the country. So we have just taken decisive, concrete action around a number of fronts, and that is going to see lower prices for Australian households and families thanks to the work of the Turnbull government.
The member for Port Adelaide.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The CEO of the Energy Consumers Australia said this morning, and I quote, "There is a real issue of governments coming together and implementing the Finkel report, all 50 recommendations. That is work that has to be completed to really settle this sector down for consumers. When will the Prime Minister stand up to members in his party room and implement a clean energy target as recommended by the Finkel review?"
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, measure after measure has been taken by my government to address the energy mess left us by the Labor Party.
100% increase.
We have been left with a shocking failure of policy by the Labor Party. What about gas? Let's think about this for a minute. The largest driver of electricity prices going up at the moment is the price of gas on the East Coast. A federal Labor government and a Queensland state Labor government together allowed a massive export facility to be built at Gladstone without any regard for the consequences for the domestic market. And the consequence of that has been the domestic market was short of gas because the exporters were taking gas out of the domestic market to fulfil their export contracts. The consequence was, because gas is the marginal fuel source in the electricity market, what that has meant has been a massive increase in electricity prices, and it has put manufacturing businesses which require gas as a feedstock or for heating, has put them at risk. And what we have done is taken strong action to limit exports that has already seen a reduction in the spot price of gas. Now, the only reason we've had to do that is because of a complete mindlessness, stupidity and complacency on the part of the Labor Party. What were they thinking, Mr Speaker? Well, I'll tell you, they weren't thinking at all. And that's the whole problem with the Labor Party. It is they do not plan. It is all ideology and politics, no economics, no engineering. That's how the honourable member's state got into the challenges it faces now, with the most expensive and the least reliable energy in Australia. And I have to say to the honourable member, the last group of people we will take lectures from on energy policy are the South Australian Labor Party. They've created the highest and least reliable electricity prices in the OECD. What an outstanding achievement for Labor ideology.
The member for Menzies.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Foreign Minister. Will the Minister update the House on recent developments on the Korean Peninsula?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Menzies for his question. Mr Speaker, reports that North Korea has acquired the ability to develop a miniaturised nuclear device which could be placed on an intercontinental ballistic missile are deeply unsettling. We need to be clear that responsibility for the tension and instability arising from the Korean Peninsula lies at the feet of the regime in Pyongyang, whose actions contravene international laws and pose a serious threat to global peace and security and stability and the rules-based order that we seek to promote and advocate. North Korea has been in flagrant violation of 6 United Nations Security Council resolutions going back to 2006, which condemn its multiple missile launches and 5 nuclear tests, including an intercontinental ballistic missile test on the 28th of July. Mr Speaker, the country has a checkered history of making and breaking promises to wind back its illegal programs. Since taking power in December of 2011, Kim Jong-un has accelerated the development of these programs. If a North Korean intercontinental ballistic missile is capable of reaching the United States, such a weapon is capable of reaching in Australia, and it poses an unacceptable existential threat to our country. Australia's policy with respect to this challenge remains clear and consistent. Presently, North Korea is defiant. However, Pyongyang is deterrable if the international community is determined and resolute. The collective way forward is for all countries to fully implement the UN Security Council sanctions against North Korea. This includes Security Council Resolution 2371, passed unanimously 4 days ago, which is the toughest and most comprehensive package of sanctions against Pyongyang to date. All nations, particularly those with a diplomatic or economic relationship with North Korea, must use their leverage to place pressure on Pyongyang to change North Korea's calculations. All nations, and critically the Permanent Five, must defend the authority of the UN Security Council. Australia is constantly reviewing and extending our autonomous sanctions regime to complement and augment Security Council sanctions, and have so far designated 37 people and 31 entities. Mr Speaker, the best prospect for stability on the Korean Peninsula and peaceful resolution to this challenge is for Pyongyang to abandon its illegal programs. This is also the best prospect for North Korea's impoverished people.
The Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
I just would briefly like to associate the opposition with the remarks of the Foreign Minister. The opposition too recognises that the actions of the North Korean government are deeply destabilising. Whilst the development of their shorter-range missiles is more advanced than their longer-range missiles, the opposition does not underestimate at all the seriousness of the threat that was outlined by the Foreign Minister. We are supportive of the outline approach in foreign policy in terms of the Korean Peninsula and North Korea outlined by the government. Labor does not regard the challenges of the Korean Peninsula as someone else's problem to be dealt with somewhere else. This is indeed a challenge to Australian stability and security.
The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the government's responsibility for the Commonwealth Electoral Act. Victorian Liberal leader Matthew Guy is engulfed in a scandal for dining with alleged mafia boss Tony Madaffery, who police say is guilty of drug trafficking, extortion and murder. It's reported the Victorian Liberals conspired to split Mr Madaffery's political donations into smaller amounts to avoid disclosure under federal electoral law. Has the government asked the Australian Federal Police to investigate whether any criminal offences have been committed under Commonwealth law?
The Prime Minister has the call. The member for McEwen is warned.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question. I can assure the honourable member that those reports will be carefully examined by federal authorities.
The member for Ford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment. Will the Minister outline to the House why it is important that employer and employee organisations always act in the best interest of their members, and is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Employment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Mr Speaker, right now the corrupting benefits legislation is being debated in the Senate as we speak. Right now, in the Senate, well, before you comment on the speck in your brother's eye, you should take the log out of your own, manage opposition business. And right now, you could actually vote in favour of the corrupting benefits legislation in the Senate, which you are opposing, and which the Leader of the Opposition said about on September the 25th, 2015. It doesn't matter if the criminality is from a union rep or it's a pinstripe suit wearing director in a boardroom of Australia. For us, we have zero tolerance. Well, if Labor really has zero tolerance of corrupt behaviour, whether it's by employers or union officials, it could vote right now to pass the corrupting benefits legislation in the Senate and in doing so send a very strong signal to the union movement and employers that it does have zero tolerance. But what we know, Mr Speaker, is that the Leader of the Opposition talks a big game in Canberra and is a mouse when it comes to Trades Hall. He talks big and he acts small. And once again we have to recognise this man has no backbone when it comes to dealing with the union movement. The Hayden Royal Commission uncovered quite a number of a sophisticated network of corrupting benefits. Tease John Holland, $300,000 to the Victorian AWU. ACI Operations, $500,000. Clean Event, $75,000. Unibelt gave $32,000 to the Leader of the Opposition's own campaign in 2007. Chiquita Mushrooms, Mr Speaker, $24,000. Winslow Constructors, $200,000. All to the Australian Workers' Union Victorian branch, which happens to be the union that the Leader of the Opposition was the secretary of and the national president of. Mr Speaker, there was a sophisticated network of corrupting benefits that Commissioner Hayden said was simply the tip of the iceberg. Now, the Leader of the Opposition could finally show some spine when it comes to dealing with the CFMEU. He could finally act like a true Labor leader, like John Cain when he was the Premier of Victoria, or like Bob Hawke when he was the Prime Minister of Australia, both of whom ensured that the BLF was deregistered by the federal and Victorian governments. But the problem with the Leader of the Opposition, he is compromised by his relationship with the CFMEU. The CFMEU is in every single forum of the Victorian Labor Party. It's given $10 million to the Labor Party, $3 million since he was the Leader of the Opposition. It's time for the Labor Party to stop being so weak, to show some strength and to actually support the corrupting benefits legislation.
The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the previous answer concerning Victorian Liberal leader Matthew Guy, who is engulfed in a scandal for dining with alleged mafia boss Tony Medaffery. Has the Prime Minister done the same? And were donations covered by the Commonwealth Electoral Act received?
Just before I call the Prime Minister, no, members will cease interjecting. I'm listening very closely to these questions. No, the Leader of the House will resume his seat. I'm going to go first, if that's okay. Yeah. The question went to two parts, referring to the previous answer. One, whether the Prime Minister had ever dined with a certain person, and the other, whether political donations had been received. On the last part, the Prime Minister has absolutely no responsibility, and that is clearly out of order. And I've ruled on that before when the member for Isaacs has asked similar questions. On the first part of the question, what the member for Isaacs needs to be able to do is to relate that to the Prime Minister's responsibilities, and I think it was sufficiently general that it doesn't do that. So on this occasion, I'm going to rule the question out of order, and the member for Isaacs can, if he wishes to, come back next time. I think it's best if we move to the next question now. Okay. The member for Bonner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration and Border Protection. Will the Minister update the House on action the government is taking to strengthen Australia's national security arrangements? Why are reforms necessary to combat new and evolving threats?
The Minister for Immigration and Border Protection.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. Thank you very much for the work that he does in his local community, particularly around the area of working with groups that are determined to see crime dealt with in his local community, supporting many groups within his community to that end. It's a great tribute to him. Can I say the first charge of this government, in fact of any government, is to make sure that we, as best we can, protect our public and to make sure that we do all that we can to provide support to our agencies to make sure that they can stare down the threat of terrorism, of organised crime, of cyber crime, and we do that as a government. The Prime Minister has been very clear that the first charge of this government is to fulfil that duty, and, Mr Speaker, we are doing it. But we know that you can't do that if you can't first secure your borders. Now, we know that when Mr Rudd became Prime Minister of this country and the Leader of the Opposition was sitting around the cabinet table, successive decisions were made which resulted in thousands of people coming by boat, in fact 50,000 people on 800 boats, 1,200 people tragically drowned at sea, thousands of children went into detention, and since this government has been elected, we have made sure that we have kept the boats stocked. Now, Mr Speaker, why would Labor have allowed themselves into the position where, when John Howard left office, there were only 4 people in government? 4 people. Wasn't that bad in election in 07. I came close myself, but not that bad. 4 people in detention, including no children at all. And the fact is, Mr Speaker, that when the left of the Labor Party overtook the leadership within the Labor Party, we saw what happened with public policy. Now, we're seeing it again in relation to national security as well, where the left of the Labor Party cannot be put into their box as they should be by a Leader of the Opposition who is too weak to do so. Now, most Australians know this Leader of the Opposition is duplicitous at best. They know that he's a con artist, and that they know, Mr Speaker—
Minister will resume his seat. The Minister will resume his seat. He will withdraw on 2 occasions. And can I just say, before I call the Minister back to the dispatch box, I do reflect on these matters, and there were a couple of occasions yesterday where I should have pulled him up and I didn't, where I have before. on a number of occasions on those sorts of references to members. So he'll withdraw.
I withdraw, Mr Speaker. I'm happy to do so. Mr Speaker, let me say that the Australian public know this about the Leader of the Opposition. He has one thing to say to one audience and something different to say to another audience. That is why he can't be trusted when it comes to border security, because he is telling the left of his party one thing and the Australian public something very different. We know that they went to the last election with a policy which would have resulted in boats recommencing, people drowning at sea and kids going back into detention. We know that in relation to national security, the left of the Labor Party is completely out of control, and we saw that yesterday with a tweet from the member for Lindsay, who quickly deleted it after she was contacted by the Leader of the Opposition's office. But has he been strong enough to come out to condemn it? No, he hasn't.
The member for Rankin.
You've done better.
Get the numbers back, Prime Minister, if you don't understand facts.
Member for Rankin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Why did the Prime Minister say yesterday that if a Royal Commission into the banks went ahead, AUSTRAC's legal action against the Commonwealth Bank would have to be postponed, when there's actually nothing to prevent a Royal Commission and related court cases going ahead at the same time? Shouldn't the Prime Minister know this from the HIH Royal Commission, which he's very familiar with, and which took place at the same time as a senior company executive was prosecuted in court? When will the Prime Minister stop making up excuses to stop a Royal Commission into the banks?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question. The most important priority is for AUSTRAC to prosecute its case. I mean, these are cases for civil penalty cases. Look, I'm not. The honourable member's challenging an opinion I gave on what the right relationship between an inquiry and a court case may be. I won't embark on a debate about that, but we could let us focus. Well, let us focus on the real issue, which is that AUSTRAC, our regulator, has done a very good job in identifying this wrongdoing, alleged wrongdoing. It is taking action and it's getting on with it. And look, the reality is this, that the Labor Party talks on and on about a banking royal commission. Fair enough, fair enough. And the Leader of the Opposition says the Prime Minister wants to give the banks a tax cut. Well, I don't think he'd be saying that very loudly at the moment. He says the Prime Minister wants to give them a tax cut and we, the Labor Party, want to give them a royal commission on the basis that that is a terrible thing to have to happen to you. Let me be quite clear about this. If you look at the likely recommendations a royal commission would make into an inquiry into the banks, one after the other, we are taking action on them. What are we doing? We're sorting out the proper complaints mechanism. We're sorting out issues of governance. We're taking tough action right across the board on accountability and responsibility. So the fact is,
Member for Brand.
We are dealing with these failures of the banks, which we acknowledge. We're dealing with them right now, in the here and now, with real action that will get people justice right now. That's the focus. Our focus is not on slogans, on action. We want action, and that is what our measures are doing. Well, if the honourable member doubts me, should go and ask a few bank executives how they feel about the changes we're making to senior executives' accountability. I can tell you they're not very worried about. They're not very happy about that. They're not very worried about
Members
a royal
on my
commission.
left.
They're not very worried about a royal commission. What they're concerned about is the real action we're taking in the here and now.
Members on both sides. The member for McMahon is warned. The member for Groom.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Justice and Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Counter-Terrorism. Will the Minister update the House on recent achievements in the fight against drugs and organised crime? What action are our law enforcement agencies taking to keep our community safe from the threats associated with illicit drugs?
The Minister for Justice has the call.
Close your Twitter account.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for GROOM for the question and the interest that he takes in law enforcement matters. Now, yesterday was a very historic day for Australian law enforcement as they commenced the conclusion of an operation that is one of the most significant takedowns of organised criminal syndicates in Australia in several decades. The Australian Federal Police and its partners have destroyed 2 separate international crime syndicates operating in Australia, Dubai and the Netherlands, resulting in 17 arrests and the seizure of 1.9 tonnes of drugs destined for Australian streets. Now, this is a massive blow to the drug trade in Australia and against the organised criminal syndicates that peddle in this misery. And I can update the House that 9 men and 1 woman has been arrested in Sydney yesterday morning, while 5 men were arrested in the United Arab Emirates by the Dubai Police Anti-Narcotics Department in simultaneous operations. Now, we will now facilitate the extradition of those suspects from overseas to bring them back to Australia to face justice. The AFP investigation, and they worked in conjunction with the New South Wales Police Force, began over a year ago and targeted organised criminal groups dealing both in drugs and illicit tobacco. Now, it's estimated that if the total drugs that were captured would have reached Australian streets, they would have had a street value of over $810 million. Now, these operations should serve as a very strong reminder that nobody in Australia is above the law. The efforts of the Australian Federal Police and our law enforcement partners demonstrate our vigilance and our effectiveness in cracking down on those that profit from the illegal drug trade in Australia. Now, it comes on top of news last week that the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, working very closely with French authorities, seized 1.4 tonnes of cocaine destined for Australian shores, and this is the largest seizure of cocaine destined for Australia in history. And it's also on the back of our efforts working with the Chinese National Narcotics Control Bureau on a joint task force called Task Force Blaze, based in Guangzhou, that has stopped an extraordinary 13 tonnes of drugs from coming to Australia, which would have had a street value of literally billions and billions of dollars. Now, in Australia, we have a significant drug problem. We have very high demand for illegal drugs, and we have a huge appetite. For illegal drugs in Australia. We also pay very high prices, and this acts as a honeypot effect for organised criminal gangs from all around the globe: North America, South America, Asia, the Middle East, Africa. Organised criminal syndicates want a slice of the Australian drug market, but these latest operations show that we will work with our law enforcement agencies to give them the tools to arrest the people that peddle in this misery.
The Prime Minister.
I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Thank the Prime Minister.